everything you're watching, your news reporters, their boss, because I worked for CBS, I worked on the daytime talk show, The Doctors. My boss ultimately is mostly the pharmaceutical industry. If you want to run a story that goes against a product of theirs, you will not work very long for that network, and that's just the way it goes.
But Del, can you kind of dig in a little bit? So the dynamic here is more complex than just that. My understanding is that pharma is basically shoveling money at media as a way to co-opt media. It's not just to advertise these things to the consumer. All that money co-opts media kind of prospectively, so that media has this bias.
Welcome back, all. Today we're unpacking a full course meal of Big Pharma, media bias, and the not-so-free market. This topic irritates most Americans considering the cost of pharmaceuticals, complexities of the medical system, and difficult or nearly impossible access to care. Let's check out what old Timmy has to say.
We won't run stories that are contrary to the interests of our big sponsors because we don't want to lose that, that nipple.
Well, it's another kind of marketing that people need to be aware of. There's the overt, Coca-Cola buys a billboard saying buy our product, and then there's the social repercussion of the advertising, which I talk about why we advertise. And a few years ago, we bought a bunch of ads in Times Square. We bought the whole North Tower on New Year's Eve was Timcast. And that's not, the intention is not so that people see it and then come watch the show. It's a cultural impact ad. We want people to think certain things about what our company does, what it represents, not necessarily to know it exists, but we want industry leaders to think certain things. So when we see the buys of these advertisements, to your point, Dr. Malone, they're not necessarily trying to make people call their doctor and say, I want to buy this. They're trying to say, we own you, to the journalists, to the editors, and create this effective barrier. While some marketing will sell a product for you, hey, everybody buy my soda, other marketing protects you from negative marketing.
It's the power of the withdrawal of the ad. Their power is in, we will pull our ads from you and stop paying you if you keep doing stories like that. That is what they're buying, right? Just like Tony Fauci, who distributed billions of dollars around the world to universities on a yearly basis, to do studies. The power is in withdrawing that funding from a university. So anytime a university wants to do a study on glyphosate or wants to do a study on anything, ring. Hey, I see here we gave you $10 million last year. We were planning on doing that this year, but we don't like this professor you have worked with, right?
Nice research program you have there. It would be a shame if something happened to it.
That's right.
And that's where it comes back to what was your original question, is like, why are we in this state? It's misaligned incentives. And I would disagree. I don't think it's a free market, because it's not free. There's so much government intervention. There's so much big corporation manipulation. I mean, the food system, the ag, for example, how many billions in subsidies have we paid?
That is the libertarian point of view.
And then
we really don't have a free market.
No, and I'm joking.
No, I know.
But you're right.
The tricky thing is, what's the appropriate response then? What's the appropriate response to fighting against something that the deck's been stacked in the opposite direction so much?
Look at what we just saw with the EPA. Liesel, did you guys hear this story? They found a $375 billion slush fund that was giving climate change grants. One nonprofit was formed a month before receiving $7 billion. Wow. There apparently were two funds, and I'm not accusing anybody of any wrongdoing, but the New York Post referenced Climate Justice Fund and Justice Climate Fund, both one receiving $1 billion, one receiving $7 billion, I think were the numbers. It's not a free market.
No.
There's one story where a guy worked for a nonprofit, and then he got hired by the Biden administration, immediately then started awarding grants back to the nonprofit. We see people who work for big pharmaceutical companies and big agricultural companies taking jobs at the FDA. It's not free market when the government is giving out billions and billions in direct cash subsidies and grants to make something happen. It looks like the free market because those somethings then buy advertisements on TV.
I will say this: when I had read Ayn Rand, early on when I was in my 20s, and Atlas Shrugged, and of course sort of the godmother, I guess, of libertarian thought, or certainly deep in it. It pissed me off because I was a liberal. By the end of the book, I was like, wait a minute, this is pissing. I thought I was with it. Now you're pissing me off. And it used to always bother me because I thought, in the idea sort of like survival of the fittest, but she didn't sort of deal with monopolies, I felt like. Like ultimately, survival of the fittest, if you get enough money in your family and you're passing on your money, eventually, can the Koch brothers, are their children going to be the smartest people running our country? They have an advantage because they're financially strong. And then when I started getting into the issues and investigations that got me into all the trouble that I'm in now, I went back because I was like, maybe I'm missing something. And I remember I typed in Ayn Rand monopolies, and it popped.
The idea that the free market isn't actually free when the government is throwing billions in subsidies and grants is a huge point. It's like calling a rigged casino a fair game. Sure, it looks like a free market when companies are buying ads and competing, but the playing field is tilted from the start. The whole survival of the fittest thing sounds great until you realize it doesn't account for monopolies or generational wealth. Like, are the Koch brothers' kids really the best minds to run the country, or do they just have the best bank accounts? Rand's philosophy is a fun thought experiment, but when you start digging into real-world power dynamics, it starts to feel a little incomplete.
There was an old Donahue, I don't know, it's way before your guys' time, but this talk show called Donahue, and she was on, he asked my exact question. He's like, but it's a very interesting, idea that survival of the fittest, but what about monopolies? Certainly a company, the train company in the center of, Atlas Shrugged, this family makes enough money, they don't have to be the smartest any longer, they have power. And she said, if you show me a monopoly that did not get government funding,
Precisely.
then I will, if you show me one, I will never speak again. She said, I want to be perfectly clear. I'm against welfare for the poor and I'm against welfare for the rich. And what we have is a welfare for the rich. Our government gets involved. It chooses the better products and it changes the entire natural course of all business. And I think that's what we have to look at. It's what we're talking about.
This is the Murray Rothbard position, who is really more of the intellectual guns behind modern, the term is anarcho-capitalism. He coined it. That's the Austrian School of Economics that Javier Milei comes from. And this is precisely his point, is that monopolies only exist when government creates them.
Right. Right. When solar is a great idea, does it make sense to pour, billions of dollars then we throw it out? Or, electric cars, at a certain point a market takes over. I mean, it's a good question. How does it compete? But you look at like when Bobby Kennedy or anyone you want to get in, you can't, if you just said, let's just take away all subsidies, like our nation is like, it's all built on Band-Aids on Band-Aids. If you tear them off, which is what Trump's doing right now, it's gonna hurt.
I agree largely with the talk about government funding and manipulation and how it controls markets. But there still is a question around artificial dyes, for instance, in foods. Because like you were saying earlier, the brighter colors sell better. And you can go back to the stories of the old snake oil salesman. 10 years ago, I was at a mall. You ever see a balance bracelet? You guys know what balance bracelets are? Yeah. It's a lie is what it is. And what these companies were doing were selling rubber bands, silicon bracelets, and then using a magic trick known to every magician, known as the center of gravity illusion, where you ask a person to, so they do this trick to, it's largely pattern distraction, to claim that an object is imbued with magic powers, which they're then going to make disappear or levitate or who knows what. You tell someone it's got magic powers, put it in your hand. And then, or actually you say, put your arms out, stand on one leg. They will put their hand on your arm and pull slightly at a downward, rightward angle away from your center of gravity, causing you to fall over. They will then hand you the magical object imbued with great chi, and you'll hold it in your hand. They then push down slightly towards the center of gravity. To the average person, they don't recognize the slight shift, but when you're pushing towards the center of gravity, the person cannot fall. So they're being pushed down, and they're like, why aren't I falling over? A company figured out this thing and started selling rubber bands, telling everybody the rubber band will improve your performance. They were in malls all across the country. They made, I think, tens of millions of dollars before the FTC stepped in and said, stop tricking people and stealing their money, selling them $50 rubber bands. There is the question of the nanny state. We don't want to be like Mike Bloomberg, who went on TV and said, tax the poor, don't let them buy large sodas because they're stupid and they hurt themselves. But there is a line, right, where we're like, bro, you can't sell rubber bands for $50 and use a magic trick.
I agree. And the example I like to use is, there's a strong case to be made that modern McDonald's diet causes obesity, and obesity is one of the major drivers of diabetes and a variety of health problems. But do we want to have the state saying that you can't eat McDonald's hamburgers and drink sugary Coca-Colas? We don't. That's, I think most of us would agree that's not okay. But then the converse is, if those McDonald's products are using, let's say, seed oils in their manufacturing that is associated with health risks that are, above and beyond the call, and they don't have to do those things, does the state have the right to say, no, we're not going to allow you to use seed oils? Now, I'm not advocating that position right now, but I'm making the point.
Can I ask about seed oils, though? Do you have a position on seed oils?
Absolutely. Seed oils, I'm convinced, are a major driver in our obesity crisis.
What is the mechanism for that?
It has to do with their metabolism or absence of metabolism and the storage of the fatty product.
Big Pharma, corporate media, and government subsidies are all tangled up in a messy web of influence and control. It's not a free market. It's a rigged game. And while we're all out here trying to make sense of it, the real question is, how do we fight back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get this conversation going. And if you're as fired up about this as I am, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and remember, question everything, especially the things they don't want you to question. See you next time.